Well, welcome everyone to the 82nd episode of Women on Wealth. I'm Jelena Ogilvie, and today's topic is understanding and protecting yourself from financial exploitation. And this is a topic that has been around for quite some time, and it's unfortunately, I believe, growing at a pace that really needs to be addressed. And so I'm thrilled to have someone on to discuss with us today this problem. So today I have Ben Rizzuto, who is a wealth strategist with the special consulting group at Janus Henderson Investors. In his role, he works with financial advisors, he works with their clients to find solutions for today's increasingly difficult retirement, wealth transfer, and financial planning issues. And this certainly falls in there. He's in the business for about 20 years. His bio goes on and on, but he is a certified financial planner. He's a chartered retirement plan specialist. And I know from speaking with him that there is a lot of interest from our community right now on this topic. So I'm thrilled to be able to have you on. So hi, Ben.
Hi, Julie. It's great to be with you today.
Good to be with you. And I know that this is not your first conversation today around this.
It's an unfortunately popular topic, I will say that.
Yeah. So I guess before we get into the topic, your firm has a partnership with Wayne State in regards to resources that you've created. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So Wayne State University, if you don't know, is up in Detroit, Michigan, and they have a Institute of Gerontology. So the folks in that institute have really spent their careers thinking about and studying and trying to understand how people age. And as we all know, the unfortunate bit about aging is we sometimes cognitively decline, we can sometimes physically decline, and that unfortunately leads to financial exploitation issues. So they have created and allowed us to use a number of different tools and resources to help advisors, clients, and their families understand what financial exploitation is, understand some of the things that they should be on the lookout for, and more than anything, protect themselves and their assets when it comes to these scams, which are increasing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I have to imagine with all the financial advisors across the country you talk to that this comes up all the time. And so this is basically, this conversation is coming from that partnership that you have with them.
That's right. Yeah.
And so thank you, because I think these resources need to be a lot more prominent out in the community, and we need to create more awareness. So I guess let's get into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I guess first, who should worry about financial exploitations?
Right. And, as we get into the content here, who should worry about this? In many cases, when it comes to this idea of financial exploitation, we think about older adults, right? Because those are the folks who may have cognitive decline. Those are some of the folks who have physical decline. But let me share a couple case studies that I think will answer that question of who should be concerned about financial exploitation. So the first is a woman by the name of Brooke Astor. Now, Brooke Astor was a New York City socialite and a philanthropist. She married into the Astor family, which was big into the fur trade and real estate. Very wealthy family. And as you can see, later on in life, she developed Alzheimer's. But her son actually took advantage of this by writing checks to himself and using withdrawal slips in order to steal millions of dollars. Now, what's also interesting about this case is it's actually her son's son, or Brooke Astor's grandson, who was the person who came forward with information in order to basically convict his dad.
Wow.
But I think this case study is kind of the stereotypical case study that we think about. An older adult who has cognitive issues, Alzheimer's, dementia, something like that, who is taken advantage of. Now, that's on one end of the spectrum.
And by the way, taken advantage by a family member, right?
Right. And that's something we'll talk about as we get into some of the trends here, that it can unfortunately be those who are closest to us who can take advantage of us. But this is on one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, you have someone like Cindy Crawford, a person who, for many of us, is eternally youthful, right? She was the target of an extortion attempt. So a person, a model that she used to work with, attempted to coerce $100,000 from her and her husband, Randy Kerber. They had a photo of their daughter tied up. Now, this occurred in 2009. At that time, Cindy Crawford was 43 years old. Her husband was 47 years old. They were in perfectly fine, if not great, physical and mental shape. But I think these two examples are really important because it shows us that it's not just older Americans.
Right.
It's not just people who have Alzheimer's. It is really all of us who may be vulnerable to financial exploitation. And that's why I think it's so important for us to be talking about it today, so that people understand what to look out for, but also just be more open in talking about it with their friends and their advisors and their family members.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Yeah, I would say, I think I shared with you, Ben, that I know a woman here in the area that moved recently into Connecticut. She lost her husband. She's retired, so she's very has no mental issues, and she just started dating online. And
Right.
she was commenting on this to us, that this lovely gentleman that sent her very handsome pictures of himself, that he quickly asked her to go on Snapchat. And not only that, she made a reference to going to Long Island from Connecticut, and his response was about the fact that she went north. So he didn't know where Long Island was relative to Connecticut, asked her to move to Snapchat. So we very quickly were trying to, and again, she's very, very smart woman, but I think this person was leaning into her vulnerability, maybe about losing her husband. And
Right.
yeah, so that was another example I was thinking of as you're going through this.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some of the common scams that we're seeing in a little bit, and the romance scams, as they're called,
Yes,
is
thank you.
something that we're seeing a lot, and it's a really difficult one because it deals with human emotion,
Yeah.
right? Which is always a touchy subject.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I'm jumping the gun because I really get emotional about this
Right.
topic. So I guess for anyone that's already worried about where this conversation is headed, what exactly is financial exploitation? How do you define it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let's look at a few examples of how we might define it. The one that I usually point to for folks is the misappropriation or misuse of an older and or vulnerable adult's assets or funds, right? And as you noticed, I hesitated and really kind of underlined the and or, because it's not just older folks, it's vulnerable adults. And with the number of these attempts that are occurring on a day-to-day basis, with the fact that more and more of our lives is moving online and being digitized and things like that, I think we are all vulnerable to these sorts of attempts. A couple other ways that people will define financial exploitation: deceiving someone with the promise of goods or services, right? Cashing someone's checks without their permission, as we saw with Brooke Astor. And if you think about all three of those, there's no age limitation that goes into any of those. These are things that can happen to all of us, no matter how old or young we may be.
Or even mentally aware.
Right, exactly. Whether we are, cognitively solid or in cognitive decline, these are things that can happen to all of us.
Yep. Okay. And who would you say are the common perpetrators?
Right, and that's the other kind of unfortunate bit, because as I mentioned, many times it can be those who are closest to us that take advantage of us. We saw that in the Brooke Astor case. So when it comes to common perpetrators, the stats show that 62% of the time, exploitation happens with someone that we already know and or trust. So
That's
that can,
high.
it is.
Yeah.
So that could be our family. It could be friends. It could be caretakers, professional service providers, or it could be strangers. But many times it's someone who has access to us, who already has our trust, that is able to worm their way in or gain access to our information or our assets that unfortunately takes advantage of people. So I think that's why it's so important to be talking about this, not just between you and I, you and me, but for families to be
Yes.
talking about this so that they can be on the same page on what's going on in someone's life.
I love that. And so it's kind of leading into my next question, but what do families do then to protect themselves?
Right. So conversation is key. And I think it gets into a number of different areas. I think it's important for families, parents, kids, grandkids, whomever it may be, to sit down sooner rather than later when everyone is of sound mind and body to talk about, what are our wishes as we get older? What is going on in our lives? Do we need help with this or that? If you need help, who is going to take care of you? Or who are we going to look to take care of you? Who are some professionals? Who are people that we trust that we can get recommendations from? And I think this is a great way to bring in their different advisors, whether it be financial advisors, estate planning attorneys, whatever it may be, because these conversations are key just so everyone is on the same page. That's really the main thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of the reasons our firm believes so strongly in financial planning, because this falls right into that whole element, right?
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, it's this holistic view of your client and yourself that is so important,
And how has financial exploitation changed or maybe transitioned over the years?
Well, I think the trend is that it has just increased in number and in size. For those who may be watching on YouTube, you can see the numbers, but the FBI puts out a report every year that talks about or shows how many victims in certain age groups they've seen over the past year. And in 2023, there were over 101,000 victims over age 60. They lost $3.4 billion just in 2023.
Wow.
And that was an 11% increase from the previous year, which was when it was $3.1 billion. Now, one thing that's important to note here, these are just reported cases and dollars that were lost.
Yeah.
There have been estimates by AARP, for example, that have said if you take account or look at those dollars that are actually lost and those where there's an attempt on those dollars,
yeah,
the amount jumps up to $20 billion in their estimation. So this just means that exactly, and it means that it's happening on a day-to-day basis, and unfortunately, people are falling for it on a day-to-day basis. Now, one thing that's important is the numbers I just mentioned are for people over 60, right? 101,000 cases, $3.4 billion. But like I said, this is something that affects those who are younger. And the FBI has put out numbers that said that, in 2023, those under 20, those people that are tech savvy, as we might say, still lost $40 million to financial exploitation. And you can see it in any age cohort, whether in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, people are falling victim to these things and they're losing billions of dollars because of it. Now, one thing that I think is important is I noted that these are just reported losses. And we have seen that the dollar amounts that are lost each and every year since 2018, which is when we started tracking this, they've gone up from 500 million to over $1 billion to over $3 billion now. But what's really interesting is to look at the number of reported cases or victims. And there we've seen a general increase, but we've also seen individual decreases year over year. And where we saw the most significant decrease in victims was in 2020. So the question is, why?
Yeah.
right? So this is my thought on why. There's a couple of reasons why I think this happened. We all know what happened in 2020, right? The pandemic. The
Right.
pandemic affected us all, whether we like it or not, in some way, shape, or form. But one way that it affected us is I think that all of us felt more isolated, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Whether we were working at home full time or going into the office only part time, whatever it may be, we felt more isolated. And we saw a decrease in the number of cases that were reported in 2020. I think part of that is people didn't know who to reach out to. They felt alone, right?
Makes
And
sense.
that's why, again, this is so important for us to be talking about, for people to understand that if nothing else, they have you. They have professionals like me, and they have the folks at Wayne State University who are here to help.
Sure.
The other part of this, and the other reason why I think there was that decrease, and why I think the actual number of cases that are reported is probably low, is because there's a lot of embarrassment and shame that goes into
Sure.
this.
Yeah.
This happens to people every day, but they don't want to tell anyone about it.
Yeah. And so the number ramped up very aggressively from your slide from 2019 to 2020. And then now all of a sudden it's ramping, not as aggressively, but it is increasing again. And I
Right.
think it's very disturbing to see what would happen if it continues, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Who knows? It'll be higher than it is in 2023 next year.
Yeah.
I would bet money on it.
And as you were talking, one of the things I was trying to walk through in my mind was, okay, during the pandemic, were individuals that are cognitive of their, that are mentally capable, or were they just more aware of their situation? Were they paying more attention because they were home? I don't know.
Right. It's an interesting question. Were we more aware or unaware based on what was going
I
on,
guess I don't
right?
know.
Because I can remember days sitting at my dining room table working from home where I wasn't quite sure what I was doing with myself or my life.
Yeah.
And the only thing, or one of the few things that many people had, was we watched Netflix. We had our, the daily delivery from the Amazon man was a
Yes.
huge occasion, right? Because that was
Yeah.
maybe the only social interaction we get.
We're watching on TV.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that may have, I think, maybe led to maybe an increase in these sorts of things, because people were just spending more and more time online. And we got out of the habit, we got out of practice dealing with people, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just frustrating to see that the number got better for a couple of years, but now it's progressively getting worse again. So
Exactly.
okay.
And that speaks to, I think, just how much better these scams are, and how technology is unfortunately helping scammers create these scams that much more easily, and they're making them that much better as well.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. No, thank you. They're staggering numbers. They're so disappointing. And what are, I guess, when you mentioned earlier the romance scam, can you talk through what some of these more common frauds or scams are?
Yeah. So there are many that the FBI covers in their report, but I want to talk about four that we see a lot. The one that usually is number one or number two on that report is tech or call center fraud. So let me talk about this, because we probably have all experienced it. So this is something that occurs when we receive a call or a text or an email that says your device, your software, your computer, your phone has been infected, or there's some issue with the software, it needs to be updated. And it asks us to either call a number or click a link. And someone, of course, on the other end of that link or that call would be more than happy to help us with it. Unfortunately, by clicking that link, that in many cases opens the door for scammers in order to start gathering information or gain access to our computer, which then holds all of our information. So a couple things that I always recommend or encourage folks to do when they get one of these emails, for example, is to look at the email address. You know, when you receive an email, it may say it comes from, just for example, Microsoft support.
Yes.
But many times we'll see with these scam emails that there may be a slight misspelling in Microsoft support. Or one better is to double click on Microsoft support, and that'll expand and it'll show the actual email address that it comes from. And in many cases, you'll see there's a misspelling in the email address, or it'll come from an email address that is in no way, shape, or form
Completely
associated.
Yeah.
Right. In no way, shape, or form associated with Microsoft or anything like that. So that's a way, I think, to help protect us from this sort of scam. And really, it's just leveraging our unfamiliarity with technology and the urgency we have around getting our computers fixed, and getting our phones working.
Yeah. And this actually just happened recently to my 15-year-old daughter on her phone with her email. And it was one of those, thank God she wasn't on our family computer. So we had to have that whole conversation of, you need to hover over that where the email is coming from. Or it was actually at the time, I'm like, don't you dare open a single email without checking with me. That was my initial reaction. But I mean, the fact that we have to educate these kids so early on because they're on these devices makes this whole conversation even scarier to me.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so,
definitely. No,
definitely.
that's a big one. What's the other? You mentioned.
Yeah, another few. So in investment scams, I think anyone who's listening to this, if they have any sort of investment opportunity, will or should reach out to you first to talk about that, or any financial advisor that they're working with. But the thing to remember with investment scams is this: many times these offers will come unsolicited, right?
Yeah.
More importantly, the investments will offer high returns with little to no risk. And there's probably some sort of time frame associated.
Okay.
This is a limited time offer, right? Yeah. That sort of thing, only for you. But I think the thing we need to remember is that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Right.
One other story that I've heard that is kind of in the vein of investments is timeshares. Many people have timeshares, as we know. Many people want to get out of their timeshares, as we may know. I've read an article recently, it was in the New York Times. Mexican cartel has gotten into this.
Oh my gosh.
They will get lists of those people who have timeshares. They'll reach out and they'll say, Jelena, would you like to get out of your timeshare? Yes, I would. Please send us $50,000. We'll start the process. And then they're gone, right?
Wow.
So of course it's a difficult one. And really, I think it gets into this point, which is maybe the most important point that I make today. When it comes to big life decisions, big financial life decisions, right? Those decisions should be human decisions, right? We want to make sure that we're talking with a human, we're meeting with a human, that we are doing those sorts of things to ensure that it is a valid transaction.
Yeah. And before you switch on from the investments, outside of timeshares, are there other types of investments that this is very popular for? Like, for example, I'm hearing a lot of cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Cryptocurrency saw the greatest increase in activity, 2022 to 2023. Say what you will about cryptocurrency. I think in this case, it should be seen as a red flag. Scammers will ask to be paid in cryptocurrency. I've heard stories of people who have been the target of extortion attempts where they need to go to a Bitcoin ATM, right? Cryptocurrency should be a red flag for a lot of folks.
Okay.
But again, it can be any type of investment, but in most cases, it's one that provides some sort of fantastic return with little or no risk.
Yep, exactly. No, thank you for mentioning that.
Mm-hmm. So another one that we see a lot, and this is a classic one, is these lottery sweepstakes and inheritance scams. Now, this is one, like I said, that many of us may have experienced in the past because many of us have gotten an email
Yes.
that tells us that somehow, some way, we are part of some royal lineage in Europe or Africa somehow. And if if we could just help the person at the other end of the email get this money out of those countries, we would receive some great payday, right? Um, the thing to remember with this sort of thing, whether it's the lottery, a sweepstakes, or an inheritance, is that in all those cases, there's never a prepayment that has to occur before you receive those things.
Correct.
And that's what these scammers are looking for, is some sort of prepayment in order to unlock this prize, as it may be. So that's one that we have seen a lot in the past. It's the classic name for it is the Nigerian prince scam.
Yeah. Oh,
So
wow.
yeah.
And Ben, I received one of these, I think it
Mhm.
was last week. And it wasn't asking for money. It was them asking me to click on a link.
Right.
And when I hovered over where it came from, it was an email that made no sense, so I deleted it. But it may even be an invitation just to click on something, right?
Exactly, because I think, like I said, many of us at this point have seen that tact where they say, if you can send me this money, we can get X
Yeah.
out of wherever. So scammers have gotten smarter, unfortunately. And again, it's a link from someone that you don't know. It can be really quite dangerous.
Yeah. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And the
The
last one is the romance one, right?
exactly, going back to the romance scam, and this is a really difficult one, right? Because if you think about it, as humans, we seek and need socialization and companionship and intimacy, right? Now, the issue, of course, is as we get older, sometimes, many times, our spouse or our loved ones or a significant other will pass away. But just because that happens, it doesn't mean that we still don't need companionship and intimacy, right? So that's why there has been this dramatic increase in these scams by people who are claiming to be a single person in your neighborhood who's looking for love, right? And I'm sure many of the listeners have seen stories where a relationship begins online. It seems very wholesome, tender, whatever it may be. And then something occurs. Usually, the person on the other end of the relationship has some sort of financial issue.
Yeah.
And that requires the other person to start giving them money. But this, like I said, can be very difficult because if we are an outsider seeing this occur, telling that person, you know, the person you're falling in love with is trying to steal your money, that can be that's a tough conversation, right?
Oh,
That's a
absolutely.
negative conversation.
Yeah.
So you're telling someone that their emotions are wrong, which is very hard. So how can we do this tactfully? And I think one way that we've encouraged both advisors and family members to think about this and start the conversation is, if you see this happening or you suspect it's happening, ask them, hey, have you heard about all these romance scams that have been going on? And they'll inevitably say yes. Hey, did you know that it cost people $350 million last year? No, I didn't know that, right? And that starts the conversation a little bit more tactfully to then get it to a point where we can talk to that person about this relationship.
Yeah.
Where did you meet this person? You haven't been able to meet them in person since you met. They're asking for money. Who's benefiting from all this, right? So that's, I think, a more tactful way to go about this.
They need to acknowledge it themselves.
Right.
Yeah. And it's like how you
Exactly.
guide them there.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Now,
That
one of
might be
the
why my approach in the past hasn't worked as well. I haven't been as tactful.
right.
I've been a bit more
But
direct.
that's the thing. It's tough because it's
It's so
emotional on
tough.
both. It's emotional on both sides of the equation. And we see this occurring and we just want to stop people from doing it. But
Yes.
as you know, we do have to help them get to that solution in a lot of cases.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, then one that I need to keep better in mind. So
Right. One tip that I'll provide on these romance scams is many folks are meeting these people online, Match.com or any other dating site, which perfectly fine. And in many cases, you can meet that person and you can have a conversation with them on that platform. But many times, what scammers will do is they'll try to move the conversation off platform into a messaging app like WhatsApp, for example.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, she was WhatsApp. I said Snapchat, didn't I?
Okay.
Yep,
Yeah.
sorry. I don't know my apps.
They all seem the same to me as well.
Yeah.
But once you go off platform, some of those guardrails, some of those protections aren't there.
Yes.
So that can be one red flag to look out for.
Okay. That's great. And Ben, I don't know if, let me just comment for anyone that's watching the slides. The romance scams that you have on here showing how it grew from 2020 to 2021, and now that a couple years later it's been slowly declining. It's almost the opposite of the all of it overall that you were showing us prior.
Right. This is one where we are seeing a decrease, but I think this is the one where the numbers are probably low, because this is the one where people are most embarrassed. How could I fall for this? Right.
Okay.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's
a great point.
The other cases, you can kind of point to a bad guy. You can point to that person who sent me that email. In this case, the person who falls for it is almost the bad guy. How could I be so stupid, right? How could I do this? But again, that's why we're talking about this today, so people understand that it is occurring.
Yeah.
It is unfortunately common, but if we can talk about it and be open about it, then that helps to destigmatize it, right?
Yes.
And that helps us have better conversations and be more open and protect ourselves from it.
Okay. No, thank you. And as we kind of start to conclude this, it's hard not to ask you what I think most listeners are going to be asking themselves is, well, what the heck are we doing about this? Like, what is being done? And it's a little confusing. You and I spoke about this right before we jumped on. I know Connecticut has had some changes. I had someone recently on talking about, financial exploitation in Connecticut. But then was there something being done on a federal level? I saw something about an act going into effect last year. Like, can you clarify this?
I'll try. So there's something called the Financial Exploitation Prevention Act that has been introduced at the federal level. We'll start federal level, right?
Okay.
Introduced at the federal level. It was introduced last year. It was introduced by, Representative Haggerty, who's a Republican from Tennessee, and John Tester, who's a Democrat from Montana. It passed the House of Representatives, and now it's been stuck in the Senate Banking Committee since then, just waiting for action. So, of course, many people are trying to lobby Congress to put this into action, but of course they're having difficulty with it.
Okay.
Now that's at the federal level. Even though it's hung up at the federal level, a lot of states have said, you know what, we're going to put something in place for the people who live in our state or the people who work within our state. So a number of different states, Michigan put something into effect in 2021. The state of Connecticut, where you're at, has something going into effect this year. Great. Again, these are usually called something like the Financial Exploitation Prevention Act. But in these cases, when they have been implemented, these acts put some responsibility on financial institutions and people who work with financial institutions to be watchful for these sorts of issues. Okay. And possibly hold up or suspend certain transactions that they feel may be some type of exploitation or scam without any sort of liability. So I think for clients out there, I think the thing to know is that in many cases, your state governments are telling financial advisors and financial institutions that they can step in if they think something is going wrong. And there's, it's in your best interest, right?
Yes.
We may be annoyed that we can't get our money out of an account as soon as we like, but it's in your best interest. People are doing it because they think something may be.
Yeah, and in fact, the podcast right before this one, Ben, is about that, and it's a woman in Connecticut sharing her story and how the institutions did not pay attention to her voice recognition was not a male asking to take money out of her 529 to go to a different account, and so I think it's, at least for Connecticut, from what I understand, it is putting more onus on these institutions, and I think they're changing the timeline of how they rectify it, is my understanding.
And
And
so, yeah.
are all these states, like, is Michigan similar to Connecticut, or are
I think that the general spirit of the legislation, what they're asking institutions and people to do, is generally the same. The timeframes, for Connecticut, for example, they can suspend or hold transactions for up to 45 days without
Okay.
any liability. The
Yes.
timeframes may be a little bit different, but the overall spirit of it is generally the same.
Well, I think what's interesting to me is my conversation with her on this last podcast. I was under the assumption that Connecticut was really far behind on this. You're leading us to believe that we're actually on the front end of it, and more states need to be done, and the federal level needs to be addressed.
Yes. There are several states that have done this, but not all of them. And it's one of those things, until it's 100%, there's something wrong.
There's something wrong. Yeah. I completely agree with you on that. So maybe this has always been my hope with the podcast, is not just the education, but if there's things that are wrong that need to be challenged, that we can use this to increase the platform. So I really appreciate that. Ben, any closing thoughts on this for the listeners? If they want to learn more, can they access these resources directly?
Yes. So through Wayne State University, you can go to their website. It's called olderadultnestegg.com. You can access many of these resources. They can, of course, reach out to you, Juliana, if they'd like. Or Janus Henderson has many of these resources available through our website.
Okay.
But, more than anything, I think my closing thought is a couple things. One, people should know that there are people like you and me and other people in the financial services industry that are here to help and know that these things are occurring and want to make sure that your assets are protected, because all of us really just want to help you get to the end of the day, get to the end of life as best as possible, right?
Yes.
So there's help out there. One. The second thing is, in this day and age, life moves very fast, right? And many times we want it to move a little bit quicker. But I think financial exploitation and some of the scams that we've talked about today really highlight how taking a little bit of time and not having to conduct a transaction instantly may be a little bit better, right? Having a little bit more human contact, talking to people about what's going on, making sure that you've got someone who will hold you accountable and say, you know what, I think something's going on here. Having that extra human interaction, I think, is real helpful, not only because it helps us feel good, but it's going to help protect our assets, right?
No, absolutely. Thank you. I guess one thing I'll add is it's always funny talking to clients about partners that we have and the resources that we get. And it's very easy for them to understand the resources that we get on a market level or strategies, economy. But it's funny, sometimes we add, oh no, we get other types of value from them too. And this is just a perfect example. So thank you to Janus and your whole community for what you provide to the financial advisors and to the clients. It's tremendous. And I will also add both links in the show notes as well if people want to click on those for more information. So thank you again.
Thank you, Juliana. It was great to be with you today, and hopefully listeners got something from this.